Shalom Chaverim. This is Z.E. Silver, and I am here with my good friend, Amanda Peterson. We are here to bring you a new podcast. I don't think we have a title yet. We'll figure it out, or at least what the title of the subject will be. But the reason we are here is because we are two people who are really, really curious about what the Democratic Party is going to be like in a post-Trump victory world. And so if you don't know me, like I said, my name is Z.E. Silver. I'm on TikTok, and I also run the Substack known as Gam Vagam Media. And this is my co-host, Amanda Peterson. Amanda, tell us who you are.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for letting a Republican comment on this. You can find me on TikTok. You can find me on Twitter or X, whatever it's being called right now. I was active in the Republican Party for a long time, like from an activist perspective. I've worked in politics before, and something that I'm really grateful for having you to talk about is we both saw a lot of problems with the 2024 election. I think we both called it. We kind of called what was, maybe you even called it more than I did. I kept getting maybe paranoid. And we both kind of had the eye on the ball when it came to that. And there were also a lot of people who were very, very shocked and very surprised by the outcome of the election. And I think if we could predict that, well, I think that we're probably going to be on the money with some of these other predictions. So thank you for having me. I'm excited to do this.
First, well, I want to make the first correction, which is I am not welcoming you on this podcast. I want to make it very clear that I think that we are doing this together. This is not like she is a guest. This is us as a Democrat and a Republican who want to comment on the Democratic Party because, we actually have known each other really since the beginning of both of our TikTok careers, I would say. We've been like mutuals really since like October, November of 2023. And it's been really wonderful to kind of ride this journey with you because I've met a lot of people throughout the various platforms and you have as well. And I think that one of the things that I've really come back to is probably that you are one of the most consistent people, like intellectually honest people, and also humble. I think that one of the real challenges that I have with so many is that they either refuse to accept and admit that they were wrong, or they take the fact that they were right as a reason to basically say like, oh, I'm right about everything. And I don't think that either of us necessarily do that. I think that we accept and admit when we're wrong. And also even when we are right, like you kind of were hinting at, that both of us were actually like pretty on the money around the election, but like in our private conversations, constantly I was like, I don't know, like I could be wrong. Like I could be wrong. Like maybe. Like, and both of us, like I hit every state correctly except for Wisconsin because I was like, there's no way that Trump can win literally every swing state. And all the while, like Amanda was like, oh, I don't know if maybe he could take Georgia. Like, could he take North Carolina? Like, I don't know. And I'm like, no, he's definitely.
My prediction was that he got every swing state besides Michigan. So we
Yeah.
both predicted it correctly, but got one wrong.
One wrong.
But opposite one. Well, but I mean, like we knew the Sun Belt was going, and I always kind of knew the Upper Midwest would all flow together too. I don't think Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan have ever voted without the three. Like they all swing together. Or if they have, it's been a very long time. I mean, it was like one of those weird things where it's like you don't want to give them all, but it was very clear, I think, watching that election, it was going to swing all with one or the other. And it just became very clear it wasn't going to swing with Kamala. But we can talk about that.
And we will. And so the reason why also we're doing this and why we hope that you will continue to listen is because I think we come at this from two different perspectives, but with the same goal, which is that like we both want a just normal, viable Democratic Party. So even though as someone who is a like former partisan Democrat or a former registered Democrat, I still align myself with the values that the party technically stands for in the sense of and the certain policies that they want to achieve. Like I'm looking for more access to healthcare, for climate change, and green energy. I genuinely believe that government can be used for good and can implement good. And so I want a Democratic Party that is viable, that can win, while Amanda, wants a Democratic Party that is not crazy, because while she would prefer the Republican to win in any particular election, at the end of the day, she knows that they won't win every election, which means that if they're not going to win every election, we might as well have a Democratic Party that is going to put up candidates that are normal. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. What you say is correct, but like I just think that like if you've spent any amount of time, there's two different types of people when it comes to, or three different types of people when it comes to politics. People who hate it, don't want anything to do with it, don't want to be in the conversation. Then there's people who, when they hear talking about politics, they think, now I just get to tell people my opinion. And their opinion is usually regurgitating something they heard somewhere or something they saw on an Instagram graphic. And I think what the unique thing about you and I is we've both transcended both of, like, we're not either of those. We are the third person that's kind of hard to find that like can look at politics from an analytical perspective. And so first of all, I just find it fascinating and more fun to talk about the Democrats right now. Maybe that's changing a little bit. I think actually I'm very curious about like the Republican thing, so maybe if this does well we talk about that too. But I think it would be very selfish and naive for me to think that because I think a certain way, that every single person agrees with me in the country. And I'm aware, and everyone should be aware, that like other people who disagree with me, like you disagreeing with me on like the policies that you just mentioned and stuff, it's not that you don't have the access to information that I have that makes me feel differently. It's that you just see things differently. And that like people who see things the way you do deserve to have a party that can like win. You know what I mean?
Totally. And I think
Yeah.
that, and the way that you put it, I think is very similar also to the way that I see about the people that I like to talk politics with, which is one thing that I have very much noticed is that people, the vast majority, like 99% of people, mistaken their personal opinion for like objective fact. And so when they, prescribe some type of policy preference that says like, people, this type of person is going to vote this way, this type of person is going to go that way, then it's really more of like their personal opinion. It's like the concept of motivated reasoning. And I think one of the things that the two of us do very well is we separate our personal preference for like the objective analysis, which is like, you know, we can say we want somebody to win while simultaneously saying they probably won't win. And I think that a lot of people, and what I've definitely noticed on like some of the major political creators on TikTok, there's one in particular I'm thinking because he just looked straight into the camera and was like, the polls are wrong. They're wrong.
Oh God,
The polls
him.
are wrong. And he has like 330,000 followers. And he straight up with like 100% conviction in his eyes was like, Kamala's going to win every single swing state. And I'm like, my dude, there's no way that you can actually think this. Like all you have to do is look at the objective facts. And I know that it's scary, but that's kind of like why we're talking about this, because at the end of the day, like, and it's not just that Democrats are like this, Republicans are like this as well, at least in party politics. And, they just so happen to be on the right side of the pendulum right now. And so what we're hoping for is to have two people who know how to separate personal preferences from objective analysis talk about this particular Democratic Party because they're in such disarray, which is like, of course, the classic thing that are they in array? Like, I love that. But they're in disarray right now. And so we're going to talk about it. So we're going to go into it by looking back at the 2024 election to talk about what it's going to look like with the Trump year specifically, and also just in general, like what can the Democratic Party do to just, in general, not just win at the presidential level, but also at the senatorial, congressional, and even at every level of government? And of course, a little caveat, for the most part, we are going to be trying to separate ourselves from the day-to-day breaking news because everybody just gets so bogged down in it. And there are plenty of people that are talking about it. And we probably don't have that much of a unique take on it to begin with. However, it just so happens that today of all days, as we're recording it, is the day after Elon Musk does his salute or whatever you want to call it. And the reason we're talking about it, or we're going to talk about it, is because it is so pertinent and so relevant to, frankly, why the Democratic Party lost and why they clearly have not learned anything and why they're prone or primed to lose in 26 and in 2028.
Yeah. Unless they figure it out. Maybe they figured it out. But yeah, I don't know.
I do not have any faith as of current. And so let's talk about why, because I think that the complete shift when it comes to, or how about better this, when we're looking at the Elon Musk incident, they immediately took something that is somewhat interpretive, right? And they immediately went for, well, he's a fascist, he's a Nazi. And they went down the same rabbit hole that they have been talking about with Trump for almost 10 years at this point. And what was so fascinating in the 2024 election, and I think this is a good starting point, which is they tried to hit Trump with the fascist argument quickly early on, and it clearly did not stick. Clearly, because if people actually thought he was a fascist, they wouldn't have voted for him. And also, if the Democratic Party and if Kamala Harris, if Joe Biden, if they thought that he was actually a fascist, if they thought that he was literally Hitler, then they wouldn't have approved his presidency. They would have said, no, he's too much of a danger to the country. And so therefore, like, we're not going to allow this to happen. And now they're doing the exact same thing. They looking at something and trying to prove that, oh, see, he's a Nazi, he's a fascist. And so I'm curious on your end, because I think that this is just Democrats not learning their lesson. What is your take right now?
On the Elon thing specifically, broadly speaking, yes, they have not learned their lesson. And I think I kind of wonder if they're going to be able to learn their lesson until something else comes along. And this is why I say that. To me, when I look at the problems that the Democrat Party has right now, the broad overarching one, you hear people say, like, I see these copes all the time from Democrats that I like and respect, but, well, it's our policies that are better, but, you know, Republicans just don't understand. By the way, like, the point of politicking, like, the point of the whole thing is to convince the other side or convince independents. So it's not just like your policies are better. And I think that there are some very unappealing Democratic policies as of late, like, we can get into that. It is a messaging problem, and the Elon thing kind of falls under the messaging problem. But I think the biggest problem that the Democrats face right now is they've had one party rule for too long. And when you have one party rule, and not even one party rule, but when you have one main, like, donor class, when you have one
Can you describe why you think that is? Because to me, I don't think that it's been a one-party rule at all. I mean, when you think about the actual history of it, right? Like, Obama won in 2008, and then, there was this major blue wave, in both the House and the Senate, but then the Tea Party won in 2010. And for the most part, like, while the Democrats have had like slim majorities here and there, it seems to me like for the most part, Republicans have at least held the lower chamber, or both have the House and the Congress, like, way more than the Democrats have.
When I say one party rule, that's maybe the wrong way to put it. In certain areas where I think we're seeing massive government failure right now, there is one party rule, like in Los Angeles and Chicago and New York. And so that's one. But on the other side, when I say one party rule, I guess what I mean is the same Obama operatives have been in charge this whole time, and they're rerunning the Obama script. And I just don't think it works anymore. I think that, how do I want to, okay.
Well, if I could add to that, because I do agree with you that, like, that definition 100%, I think maybe instead of kind of like going with like a one party situation or one party rule, but rather it's kind of like a singular orthodoxy that has ruled the Democratic Party since 2008. Basically, it was a bunch of people, because I think that this is actually the core of the problem. So we're in agreement on this, that you had this class of political operatives that entered in 2008 with Obama, who were young and hungry and like ready to take on the world. And Obama won in this massive way in 2008 that also included Congress and Senate. And as a result, they said, okay, well, like, clearly our way must be the best way. It's this new way with data and, field operations and so on and so forth. And in one way, they weren't wrong, because in 2012, he also, beat out Mitt Romney. But in another way, they really, again, did not humble themselves by saying, okay, well, what are the additional factors that led to our victory? One of which was 8 years of George W. Bush, of the Iraq War, and of course, like the October surprise and the 2008 recession. And so both things were happening. So I think that Obama was always going to win because of the reaction to Republican, but and then you had the additional amplification of his victory by his tactics. But what's so interesting to me is that, like, I was just saying, starting in 2010, there was a massive upset. In 2012, Obama wins the presidency, and wins the Senate, but if I'm not mistaken, Congress goes to Republicans. And then in 2014, both the Congress, both the House and the Senate are controlled by Republicans. And then in 2016, you also have you have the Democrats lose in the presidency. So in reality, like, Obama didn't win in his time. And even worse, actually, statistically, he oversaw like the worst reduction in terms of totality of Democratic elected official seats, both not just at the federal level, but at the state level over his 8-year period. But nonetheless, his political operatives continued to control the Democratic Party and its operations up until today.
Okay, this has been my theory for so long of this, so I have a lot to say on this. If you look back at think pieces after Obama got elected, the mainstream thought, not just in liberal media, like in legacy, or what we would have called back then mainstream media, and definitely what liberals thought in liberal media, was that Democrats were going to win the next century. Republicans were not going to be able to win anymore. And it was because Obama came together with this huge coalition. He had the right tactics, but not only, I mean, like, the demographics of the country were going to change, and it was going to get much less white. And as the country got less white, none of these non-white people were going to vote for racist, evil, religious Republicans. And so, in my opinion, and I made a video about this, the response to that was always an irrational thing to think for Democrats. Somebody probably should have checked them on that. I'm sure people did. But what happens when you check them on that is those people, the dissenting people, get pushed out. So if you are entering into this thing where you guys think it, not you guys, because you don't think this, but when
I did though. It's okay. You can lump me in with that because, and again, this is where I'm going to put my hand up and admit that I was wrong, because I believed that. I was 17 years old, so I didn't get to vote for Obama in 08, but I was there and I was involved in politics until 2014. I left professionally, but I was still involved, and I, was in debates, and I volunteered, and, I went to fundraisers, and all of my friends were still in politics, but I was there, and I believed wholeheartedly 100% that demographics were destiny. That was the line, and that's what I believed, because there's no way that, a bunch of non-white people would vote for the racist, anti-Semitic Republican Party. So you can let me in for that.
Well, I don't mean to, but like the point I think, or I think what the problem was that if people truly believed that, and they did, and you did, why are you going to call out, you guys are going to win no matter what? So why are you going to critique the person who's going to win? Because if you critique that person, and critique is a nice way of putting it, if you have a dissenting opinion, they're just going to kick you out. They're just,
Wait, can you expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, like, okay. When the stuff starts coming out, we'll take a specific issue, because I think that this is kind of what the problem is right now. So I think the vast majority, like, if you look at polls right now, the woke DEI trans stuff, like the far trans stuff, there was kind of a complete repudiation of that. Like, something like 60% of the country or 70% of the country is like, we don't want that. To me, the writing has been on the wall for that for a very long time. I noticed that. I think most Democrats don't like that. I think that you don't love that. I think most Democrats don't like that, but it's kind of like, well, the other side's probably worse, so I'm going to focus my efforts on them, not this. Democrats would be right to say that, like, the majority of Democrats don't feel like the super radical woke stuff. The majority don't. But you probably don't see it as like that big of a deal. So you're not going to flush it out of your own party, because it's easier to go against the other side rather than go against your own. So you're not going to go against your own. And so that's why you have a two-party system, because like the other, it's just the pendulum's going to keep swinging. But I think that happened for a long time. You don't see dissenting opinion really within Democratic rank and file. I think that you can point to like the Bernie Sanders stuff with that. Like Bernie had some sort of popular support, and it was just kind of like, well, get him in line, have him endorse Hillary.
Well, I think there's a combination. So you're not wrong. And what happened, I think, over time, because I don't like to use like my personal experience as proof, but what I will say is I think that there's a piece of evidence, or what I would say is that I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people would resonate with this. So really starting in 2012, Obama gets reelected, and his first thing that he decides to do is turn to foreign policy. And he turns to the Middle East and says that he's going to put together like the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. And that was like my first moment as a Democrat that kind of opened my eyes to say like, oh, like maybe a lot of the people that told me that Obama was anti-Israel like might have been a little right. At the same time, like I had made friends with like, one of the, most conservative people that I had ever met at the time, who was a neocon. He was hawkish and he was brilliant. And so we would go at it all the time. And he started to open my eyes to a lot of the things about just what it meant for what Obama was doing. And so then, you fast forward to, for instance, 2013, 14, and I was a campaign manager for a state representative race in Colorado. And it was so funny because my state representative candidate was just a bad candidate, just did not want to play the game, did not do the work that was necessary in order to win. And she was very arrogant about a lot of things in which she was wrong. However, there was one thing in particular that she was right about. And I give her a lot of respect for this because she is the ultra feminist, who believes in almost like unfettered, if not unfettered, access to abortion and everything. But at the same time that we were running, there was also a race between Mark Udall, who is the incumbent Democratic senator, and Cory Gardner, who is a congressman, a Republican in the challenge. It was a really, really important race. And they had brought in a consultant from DC who had ties to Colorado, but nonetheless to get him in. And he was telling us, we had some meetings and whatnot. And so he was telling us about abortion. He's like, yeah, like when, with women, like abortion is this like number one thing. And they made abortion the number one issue for Mark Udall. He would go on there and just keep repeating the words abortion, abortion. And same thing with this other guy who was running for Congress, this Andrew something, who was a perpetual candidate. And everyone thought that this was his like best, kind of best and last chance. And so they too had him running this race, mostly focused on abortion. And eventually, the guy Andrew got absolutely slaughtered by the incumbent, the incumbent Republican, and then Mark Udall was taken out by Cory Gardner. And what was so interesting was that even a friend of mine who was running a different state representative race who is also like literally admitted to saying like I'm going to use I use abortion as birth control, was like, I think that they said abortion was too often in their commercials. And it was kind of like my first moment that I was like, man, like they really don't know what they're talking about. They don't really know what they're looking at. And also like being at the state level and working in state politics gave me a big eye open to how you can have crossover with various populations, because you'd have like a state representative who was a Democrat but a state senator who was Republican, kind of on the western slope, like in Grand Junction, Colorado, where the two of them would share issues with each other. And I was like, oh, like how interesting. Or like I'd be down in Alamosa in the Southern Valley of Colorado, where you have like a deep rooted Hispanic community, like literally since the Cortezes basically, and Steel Town, Union Town, all the way through, all Hispanic, but also don't take our guns. Do not mention our guns. Do not speak the word gun. These are ours. If you come for us, we will crush you. And so I saw Democratic senators, state senators, and representatives who were, Democrats on everything, on healthcare, on climate change, on this or that or whatever, but don't touch their guns. And they refused. They refused to step in line and said, I'm not going to vote for it, and don't put this up because I'm not going to vote for it. And it really put me in this position to understand how people respond to their constituencies. And I think that overall Democrats are so focused on the national level and on these really big picture ideas that like they're always right about this and everyone just needs to step in line, that they really are unaware and don't want to accept that populations might actually just disagree with them or are very complicated.
And that kind of brings me to like, I could write a book on this topic. I agree with everything you're saying. Like, you need to be responsive to constituencies. But when I say that Democrats kind of have an issue, like they don't want to step out of line with the party, or they don't understand why somebody would. They don't understand why they'd be responsive to constituents' issues like that. What is the best way to do that? Or like what would challenge them? An adversarial media, which they don't always have to the same, I'm not even saying like legacy media doesn't treat them the same, although I think that we probably would agree to some extent on that. I'm saying like the Republican media apparatus, since Rush Limbaugh, and Bill O'Reilly, they went just as hard at establishment Republicans as they did at Democrats. We fight in public, and Democrats just don't in that same way. It's just a party culture thing. But the other thing is, when Democrats take an issue and they make it existential, that's where they like to fight. It's like a very pundit realm. Like, I
Well,
don't
so
know.
I think that I agree with you that the Republicans have no problem. The Republican media has no problem challenging Republicans. I do think that there is an extension of this like Obama smugness that ended up being a part of the DNA of the Democratic Party, which is like, if you don't agree with me, like you must be an idiot, because that's essentially what he did. And I really felt this like during the JCPO, because this was like the real first kind of tear in the Democratic Party between Jews and the rest of the party. And we would basically say out loud, like, we don't think that Obama is right about this. Like, he has this idea about what the Middle East looks like, or he's challenging Israel, and we don't think that's a good idea because of X, Y, and Z. And as Obama would do to the White House press corps, who, would come at him. And there's actually this major article about Ben Rhodes, who's a former, policy advisor who was basically in charge of the messaging. And he has this whole system of how he like created the cycle and the relationship with the media. So I highly recommend going and finding it if you haven't ever read it. Essentially, Obama was he was so good at retort. He was so good at getting back at you, right? And that, again, like he's a once in a generation political talent. And one of his talents is the ability to be cool and while also being condescending. And nobody is ever able to pull that off, no matter what. Anytime anybody ever retorts somebody, it's always like, wow, like you were disrespectful, whatever it is. Obama never was ever accused of that. And it had nothing to do with him being black. It was literally, he was just really, really good at it. Mm-hmm. And so everybody started to take this on. And, you started to, Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert, like the culture around Democratic politics and the discussion of Democratic politics became this notion of like, if you are not in line with us, the only reason you would not be is if you're dumb, like the dumb Republicans, right? Yeah. And so it started off with, you either fall in line with what we say is true as the Democratic Party because science, you can't argue with science, or science doesn't care about your opinion, or yada, 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 which I have my own, and we could go off on that. But like, it started off with that. And then eventually, especially with Trump, it started to transition into, well, if you don't agree with this, it's not that you're just stupid. You're also a racist. You're also sexist. You're also transphobic. You're also whatever, or anti-Semitic, right? And so at that point, you're just like, okay, so you're telling me that if I don't agree with you, so I have to choose between agreeing with you or being called a racist, and not just being called a racist to my face, but you're going to go to your friends. You're going to go to our friends, our mutuals, and you're going to tell them that I'm a racist. And then they're going to be like, oh, yikes, he really said that? Ooh, okay, I guess so. And then that's the end of it. And so there was this massive social pressure that built up and up and up to the point where it's not even the fact that like you couldn't disagree because, you didn't want to, ruffle feathers, whatever it was. It was like you literally couldn't disagree because otherwise you would be shamed and ostracized and excommunicated, not just from the party, but from your friends, from your family, from potential partners, like the whole shebang. And I think that finally just hit its maximum. It hit its peak.
Well, and listen, I completely agree with you that Obama is a once in a generation political candidate. Trump is too, in a different way. And he is the ultimate middle finger to that line of thinking. To that, if it's like, I could tell, I'll quickly tell this story. Like, when I worked in Republican politics in 2016, it was trendy. Nobody really liked Trump. I never hated him because my dad was with him since Trump went down the escalator. And my dad is not a super pompous, weird, like, he was always like conservative, but like not crazy. Like, he's not racist. Like, he would get uncomfortable if we brought up race ever. Like anything like that. Like, he doesn't hate gay people, like nothing. but that was who my dad liked. I didn't know why. I liked Marco Rubio. I liked everybody, but I liked Marco Rubio. I liked Jeb Bush. I liked Scott Walker. And when I had my job, I couldn't go against the party. Once Trump, it was clear he was going to get the nomination. It was stupid to fight back at that point. And seeing the way that my chapters, when I was like working in like college Republicans and stuff, how they were treated, none of us liked Trump. None of us. And to see, like, we knew that behind the scenes, but you couldn't be out like anti-Trump, you know what I mean? Because you're supposed to be there for like the people who do like him. To see how terribly they were treated, not only by students, but by the administration. Like when my friend was doxxed by Antifa and her on campus address is published and her cell phone number and her parents' address and their cell phone numbers are published online saying, go intimidate this girl. And she brings it to the school. Yeah, that happened. And she brings it to the school and they say, well, maybe you shouldn't support a racist. And it's like, okay, so, at that point, that happened around like September, October, and I was like, fuck you guys, I hope he wins. And then I went to a rally right before Election Day, and I was like, oh, he's gonna win in Minnesota. Like, you've never seen, like, we're a blue state, and like, perpetually blue, and will always be blue, in my opinion. And like, to see that excitement, I was like, if this excitement's here, he's winning Pennsylvania. And Michelle Bachmann was there and told me he was going to win Pennsylvania, so I believed her. Yeah, so like I don't know, like Trump, for all of the bad, for all the good that the Democrats did, they had those bad kind of like what you're saying, like they had that kind of mean streak that started to come out. Trump is the ultimate middle finger to that. Ultimate.
Well,
And
I
like
think
people have
that
legitimate.
he is not just a middle finger, but I think that he actually started to play at their own game. And maybe that's now, this is the first time I'm kind of thinking about this, which is this whole thing of like, haha, like, you big ogre, whatever it is. And he was like, yeah, I'm an ogre, but like, so what you gonna do about it? Like, if I'm an ogre, then I'm going to say everything I want to say, and there's nothing you can do, because the conventional Republican candidates, like a Marco Rubio, like a Scott Walker, like a Jeb Bush, who I was hoping would win instead of Trump, they would have still succumbed to the social pressure, even though like they're Republicans. At the end of the day, they would have been cautious about saying certain things because they didn't want to be put out as a racist. But Trump just doubled down and said, like, if you're going to be condescending, I'm going to be condescending. If you're going to make fun of me, but like in a subtle way, well, I'm going to make fun of you in an overt way. And people are smart, and they're going to basically see that we're the same person as soon as I decide to show you that, like, what I'm doing is exactly what you're doing. And I readily admit, again, like, I was shocked in 2016. I sat there, I was in Austin, Texas. I sent in my vote knowing that it wouldn't have mattered, but like, I sat there with friends and watched Hillary lose Pennsylvania, and I was like, whoa, like, I can't believe that just happened. But it was at that moment that I was like, I refuse to ever be shocked again. And so I started to dig in more and more, and I started to be far more critical of the Democratic Party. And there were really probably like two things, or maybe really like one thing that really, really like got me, which was in 2018, the Democrats took back the House, and it was because we ran a bunch of like centrist normal people. And I was like, this is it. Like, if you look at it, was like a former CIA analyst, like it was this or that. Like, the reason that you like really can't name anybody who won in 2018 for the most part is because they don't make a big fuss about it. They're not AOC. They're not Ilhan Omar. Like, they're not these people who like are show ponies. They're just like normal congressmen who respect their constituency and want to get it done. And they're in the middle ground, and they can't be show ponies, right? And that's why I was a big fan of, like, I voted for Pete Buttigieg, but by the time, funny enough, I voted for him and then he dropped out because I sent it in early ballot. But Joe Biden, technically, actually, Amy Klobuchar was my number one. I was like, she can't win, so I went with Pete Buttigieg and then Joe Biden. But there was that. But like the thing that I kept coming back to that actually kept getting me was the fact that there was one poll that constantly got me, and that was the Latinx poll. I can't remember when it was published, but like, if you want to like think about like a red pill moment or a black, whatever it was, there was this like woke moment where it was something like 97% of the Latinos, Hispanics who were polled said that they don't like the word Latinx. They don't use the word Latinx, or they've never heard the word Latinx.
It was Latinx.
Whatever. And And they kept using it. They kept using it in every single debate, and every talking point was always Latinx. And I'm like, and I would go to my friends and I would bring this up and be like, Latino, Latina, whatever it is. And they would say Latinx. And I would bring up this poll and I'd be like, they don't like that word. Like, also, like, doesn't it feel like we're actually colonizing their language, like by Anglify, like, bringing the Anglosphere to a Hispanic language? And they'd be like, oh, no, no, no. Like, it's important to be like super like gender inclusive. And like, I would talk to my Latino friends and they'd be like, Latino is gender inclusive. In our language, when we say Latino, we're assuming that it's everybody, regardless. Nobody takes offense to it. And it was really, as I kept bringing this up, that I was just like, they really just don't get it. They really have no capacity to separate their orthodoxy from the practicality and the poles of it. And the more that we went through this process of seeing this identity politics playing out, which is we just are assuming that every identity group has one particular issue that they care deeply about, and that's what we're going to hammer on, whether it's Hispanics and Latinos and immigration, it's women and abortion, it's, the LGBTQ people and their relative issues, it's Jews and anti-Semitism, except of course, like, not really, Black people and cops and racism and all of that kind of stuff. And I was like, you keep doing this, but you're seeing people who are of those groups saying that they disagree, that they don't like it. And instead of listening to them, like you're telling everybody, like, listen to the voices of the people, you're dismissing them. So clearly you have no capacity to actually listen to voices. You just have an orthodoxy that is being reaffirmed. And at that point, I was like, there's no way. There's just no way. There's something wrong with the Democratic Party.
Well, and then I think also one of the reasons they can keep getting away with that, like, I don't know, I need to write a book about this or something. Both parties do this, by the way, both parties do this, but you take an immediate problem and they make it existential. So, like, Trump ran on very immediate problems. Trump ran on decreasing illegal immigration. Anybody over the age of 8 or 10 years old could have told you he wants to build a wall. I don't even think people knew if that was a good or bad thing, but everybody knew what he wanted. And he had something and he was going to do it and he built things and whatever, and he was entertaining to watch. And very proud. I mean, I don't know. I grew up watching political things. Like, everybody talked about illegal immigration back in the day. Like, okay, we're going to do a system, and, if you came illegally, you're going to go back of the line. I'm quoting Hillary Clinton when I say that. All of a sudden that became, oh, that is, no, you cannot say that. And he's just like, no, I'm going to say it. I think that, like, instead of having the discussion at that point from the Democratic side, like, instead of Democrats engaging with that, is of being like, Trump, it's not going to work. Like sometimes they did that. They would say, you can't build a wall, which was kind of, I don't know. We can
No,
talk about that.
I think
But
what
not
you're
only
getting.
that.
Oh, keep going.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry. What they would do is they would say, no, we need to include, like, we need immigration. Immigration, no human is illegal. And it makes it into this thing where it's like, you can't really ever fix the problem. Like, they're not really talking about fixing a problem and a solution anymore. They're just, like, kind of policing language. Another
Well,
one,
so
I mean,
that's you're
yeah.
right on that, and I want to jump on that because the language part of it is so important for a number of reasons. Where one, and this is I think like where like it's so good that we're doing this together, because like when you say they're not trying to fix a problem, it's because they don't think it's a problem to begin with. Right. So that's the challenge. And because they're allowing their personal preference to assume that it is objective analysis, right? As opposed to looking at a poll and seeing that like immigration is usually like a top 5 issue, no matter what the election, it ranges from 1 to 5. I'm saying with the economy and the taxes and like everybody. And instead of saying like, oh, well, we just don't believe that this is a problem, they're looking at these polls and be like, well, they're dumb, they're stupid, right? They're just giving in to racist talking points from the right wing media that doesn't actually exist, and so they come at it from this academic perspective again because they just want to be smarter. So they say, no, it's not that we need to build a wall. It's that we need to change your mind about immigration and whether or not it's a problem to begin with. And we're going to shame you into believing that immigration is only a problem if you're a racist. And instead of saying, okay, we have 300 million Americans, they're citizens, and our job is focused on them and to be representative of them and responsive to them. And they're currently telling us that they want to reduce immigration. So we need to figure out what to say while also maintaining our values and our principles. And that's one piece to it, right? The second piece to it is when you hit the nail on the head about the wall, right? And Trump's ability to invoke language. So when he says, like, we're going to build a wall, we're going to build a wall. And instead of trying to combat that with a different language, with a different slogan, they tried to prove to him, again, that they're smart and like, well, that won't work. And here's why. But the American people don't care about that. They don't want it. And whether you're in politics or you are in Coca-Cola marketing, retail marketing, whatever it is, if you have to explain your slogan or if you have to explain your brand, you've already lost. And he did it so well. Make America great again. And we were like, well, what does that mean about what was it not great? Like, what was so great about it, huh? Like, racist? But at the end of the day, like, it invoked this emotional appeal to anybody, right? Which is, and even to the non-white people who said, yes, America was great. It wasn't great for my people, but it was great for a certain number of people. And I now I have the chance to be a part of it and I want to participate in it. And so it occurred to everybody with this one that everybody got to interpret it their own way. Same with the build a wall. Like, what does Trump stand for? Trump stands for building a wall. He stands for making America great again. What did Hillary stand for? Nothing. And really specifically, right, I'm with her, right? It was all about her. And this is so critical. And I think we've talked about this before, which is that each person, each Democrat against Trump made it about them. It was about, I'm with her. It's about Joe Biden and being the savior of the Democratic Party and the savior of the country. And Kamala, it was just the next version of, 2.0, I'm with her, right? It was never about America. It was never about this idea. And the reason why Obama was so good is because he didn't make it about himself. He made it about hope, just like hope. By voting for me, you're voting for hope. Everybody is downtrodden and, poor as hell. And if you vote for me, you're going to vote for hope. And if I win and change and hope, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They're like, well, what does that mean? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in politics. And the Democrats have never been able to figure out how to bring, because I don't think that they actually believe in anything in that way, because their policies are entirely about winning elections. They're looking at each identity and saying, what do we need to do in order to placate this identity group? What do we need to do in order to placate this identity group, and so on and so forth? So then that way, each identity group votes for us in the next election, as opposed to saying, what do Americans want? And how can we be different? And how can we do good for the American people, all American people, that is within our values?
Yeah, well, and again, I would just really go back to this because I really think if Democrats want to win, I probably shouldn't give what I think they should do away, but like they need to start responding to immediate problems. Another immediate problem I remember, and this one hit home to me because I lived in the middle of it, when George Floyd died in Minneapolis and the riots ensued, right? I don't know a soul who watched the video of Derek Chauvin on George Floyd's neck and did not think like, whoa, this is fucked up. And like, that is wrong. And we need to do something about that, right? Like this cannot continue. And instead of Democrats really saying like, okay, we need to, fund this sort of educational training throughout police departments in America. We need to do this. We need to do that. It became, this is about systemic racism, and every single white person, you are the problem. And so,
ACAB.
Yeah. And we're going to defund the police and start from scratch. My favorite Kamala Harris line. I think we got to start from scratch. What are you going to put in, though? And then, like, maybe that would have worked if we didn't have these massive riots in some of these cities. But, like, I lived a mile from where that happened in Minneapolis, and like it was really scary for a long time. Like I lived in an apartment. I worked at a restaurant a couple nights a week, like literally across a very busy street from my apartment. I had to walk across one street. I walked across like with a ton of cash in my wallet, like, so stupid, in the middle of the night at like 2 a.m. Never once felt weird about that. I should have. I was young. But after the riots happened, I mean, like, you would not walk around it. I mean, all of those businesses down there closed. And people started to say, not just, white people, everybody living down there started to say, like, we need police down here. You know what I mean? Like, they're doing drag races in the street where they're, like, we need, like, law and order down here. And, well, no, that's racist. We need to solve this existential problem of systemic racism. Okay, but how? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you can point to all of these different things and say, this is systemic racism, but, like, this problem is emerging. Like, you didn't fix the problem of what happened with George Floyd, and you're not fixing the problem of, like, we would have people driving like 90 miles per hour down the road by my apartment in uptown Minneapolis. If people know it, it's like a very, like, it was like the cool place where like young people would live. They didn't have an immediate fix for it. It's just, well, we're going to stay in the existential, because when you stay in the existential, you don't actually have to solve any problem. You can just say, hey, Republican, you're racist. and
Well,
and like, that's what it, like, they need to start solving immediate problems. They need to find an immediate problem that Republicans don't speak to, and they need to solve it and put JD Vance on his back foot so he's like taken off guard to be like, whoa. Like, I have ideas about what that thing could be, but
we'll
maybe.
talk about that. Well,
Yeah.
it's interesting you bring that up though, because Richie Torres is like on he's on a crusade right now talking about how academic liberals, progressives, mostly white ones, talk about essentially implementing policies that they'll never feel the consequences of. And he specifically speaks to law and order and to the police force when he says, okay, defund the police. Are you going to live in my neighborhood that you're trying to defund the police for? Because what happens if your social experiment fails? Like in your Brooklyn brownstone, or like, are you going when New York City, gets screwed up because you've defunded the police, you get to go back to your parents, in the Midwest, right? In Cleveland, but my constituents have nowhere to go. My constituents are still here, and they're going to face the downtrodden, so like the consequences of it. And so I think that they don't want that. Progressives don't necessarily want to face those types of conversations because, again, they just want to say that it's existential, and they don't want to. And if you disagree, like, you're just a racist, right? But the other thing too is I read this book about privilege and kind of what does it look like for privilege. And one of the things that really stuck with me was this notion about what is privilege, because we keep using this word, and so you're like, well, you're privileged because you grew up in a 2-parent household. Right, you're privileged because you grew up in a place with well-funded public education. And what's interesting about this dynamic that this author had mentioned was that in reality, like, that should actually be a baseline. When you say privilege, you're assuming that the baseline is lower, that the baseline is that you don't have 2-parent household, that you don't live in a place with a well-funded education, and so it is therefore a privilege to have that, as opposed to what does it mean to actually make that the baseline, and that for everybody else to get back to zero, that everybody else is at a disadvantage, not that you have an advantage. Because by telling people like myself that the only reason we are where we are is because of an advantage, it messes with our ethos of rugged individualism, versus if you say, look, what you have, everybody should have, and they don't have it. So how do we get everybody to get back to zero so we all start off on an equal foot? That's one side to it. The other side to it is when you're talking about, for instance, like law and order, and this is why I brought this up, because the reaction to the George Floyd murder was, instead of saying we need to get rid of all police because all police are bad, but only because like we see this like one person do this, and we know that like that's not the whole case. But what they should have said is, no, it's not that we need to get rid of all police. It's that all police should make everybody feel safe. You should feel safe. You, as a citizen of America, deserve to feel protected by your tax-paying dollar police. And right now, not every person feels that they are safe when they look at a police officer. And so we, as the Democratic Party, believe that everybody should feel safe. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through each police department, and we're going to make sure that every police department has the tools in order to ensure that their police are treating everybody equally, because that is what America is all about. But instead, they focus on language. Instead of saying everybody deserves the opportunity to buy a home, everyone deserves the opportunity to rent an apartment, to have a roof over their heads, they don't even say like, oh, like housing is a human right, isn't even like the thing. You can't even say that. You're like, well, the homeless all deserve a house. And someone would be like, you should really say houseless person.
Unhoused.
Unhoused. Like, that's what they care about. And it's just the most academic oriented thing. And they're just so focused on the language which is ironic because they're really bad at associating language and messaging with what they want the outcome to be.
Yeah. Well, right. Well, but it also just gave a fast track for like the Republican Party to become the winning party in a lot of these issues, because like one is out in the theoretical sense, like, well, like, I just keep thinking about systemic racism, because like I know what it means, but like what is it really like okay, what, like, and what, and we can just be like, no, I actually think it's a bad thing to defund the police. And like most, like 80% of people are like, yep, yeah, I agree with that one. And like, if we, like, you look back at these debates that, between Romney and Obama and McCain and Obama and even Bush and Kerry and stuff. And it's like, they both agreed what the problem was and they had different solutions. And like, I don't know where the Democrats got to this point. Maybe because they feel, especially with Trump, that like, even engaging with him is like beneath them, and like you can't lower yourself to like a racist level, or I don't know. But it became very easy for the Republicans to just be like, no, no, we should not defund the police. It didn't even matter what it was, because it like they can just prescribe the problem correctly,
Right. Well, and also that they accept that it is a problem.
Yeah.
Going back to like the issue around immigration, for instance, I've been on this kick about it because immigration was such a critical part of this past election, which is that, the Republicans have kept saying, like, build a wall, we need stronger immigration, secure the border, and so on and so forth. And you have a base who is focused on basically saying it's not a problem. And they call you a racist if you say it is a problem. When there is such an easy opportunity for Democrats to basically say, we see illegal immigration as a problem as well, but we fundamentally believe that immigration is the greatest aspect of America. It's what made America great, right? If you talk about make America great again, in order to make America great again, we have to bring in not just the brightest and the smartest engineers, but the hardest working people, right? How many of us have that story of our grandfather coming here with nothing in their pockets? They were just a lowly tailor, and they came here, they didn't know the language, and they lived in a shack, and look at where I am now trying to become the president of the United States. And so what we need is not just the smartest people on the planet. What we need are the people who are the hardest working, because the hardest working people is what made this country. The people who went from the East Coast and went out and they settled onto the West and they planted their flag and they built cabins with their two hands. They weren't the brightest in science or technology or engineering. They just put their two hands right into the ground and built this country. That's who we want here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a system that makes sure that the hardest working people get into this country, not the takers. We don't want the takers. If you want to come in here and you want to take from this country, we don't want you. But if you want to come in here and you want to make for this country, we want you. And we're going to build an immigration system about that. That does it.
Yeah. No, it totally, well, yeah, and that totally would have done it, but I feel like the country has separated itself so much more. I mean, we're like a third Democrat, a third Republican, and a third independent in the middle. And like, it just got to the point where it's like, if only one party is really like prescribing the problem, it doesn't really matter if they don't have good solutions to it, because it's just easier to listen to them with that stuff.
But yeah, so that's a good. Thank you everybody for listening to the first podcast episode. Come back, we're going to be talking about Elon and how this is a perfect application of the diagnosis we just threw down. It just so happened that, Democrats showed us within about 12 hours of Trump being president that they're going to fall into the same traps. So come back for part 2 of the conversation about our first attempt to fix the Democratic Party. Thank you, everybody.